At the start of the war in the Middle East, the U.S. and Israel targeted military sites in Iran. Newer targets carry cultural importance.
It's physically and emotionally hurtful to know that our history is being obliterated.
I'm Marco Werman. Today, how Iranians are already feeling that loss. Also on the show, why some European leaders are giving bunkers in Finland a second look.
There are about 4.5 million spaces in a country of 5.5 million.
And in Belgium, one Catholic bishop is making a radical proposal.
It's extremely unusual. I can't think of another example of a bishop saying, I'm going to ordain married men to the priesthood.
Yes, ordaining married priests. Plus, the jazz rock elder from Japan who's become an idol for Gen Z fans across the globe. That's all ahead today on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for making it this Friday. Israeli and U.S. officials say they've rescued one of two pilots of an American F-15E fighter jet that went down in Iran. The news came out earlier today on Iranian media that Iran shot down the jet. Photos of parts of the plane and the ejected seat have been circulating online. Iran state media has offered a reward for anyone who finds the missing pilots. If you capture the enemy pilot or pilots and deliver them alive to the military, you will be richly rewarded, says the Iranian newsreader. There's no official word yet from the Pentagon or U.S. Central Command. If an American pilot is indeed still inside Iranian territory, this raises the stakes for the U.S. in the war against Iran. In the meantime, President Trump reiterated his threats today on going after civilian infrastructure in Iran. In a post on social media, he said he hasn't even started destroying what's left in Iran. Earlier, Trump posted a video of a bridge that was bombed by the U.S. The World's Shirin Jafari begins our coverage today, reporting that in recent days, the U.S. and Israel's targets in Iran have shifted from military to civilian ones.
This is verified footage captured by an eyewitness near the bridge. His voice has been altered by the original source for his safety. This man, who seems to be with his family, calls on them to take shelter under a tree. One calls for God's protection. The attack on the B1 bridge happened on a national holiday. On this day, Iranians go outdoors to celebrate the start of spring. This family and others were picnicking near the bridge at the time it was struck. 8 people were killed, according to Iran's state media, and about 100 others were injured in the attack. The U.S. Central Command said in an email to me that the bridge was targeted because there were, quote, plans to use it as a supply route for Iran's missile and drone forces. But the bridge was still under construction and not operational yet. CENTCOM didn't answer my follow-up questions about how it could have been used if it was not operational.
We are seeing targets that were not initially included at the beginning of this campaign.
Alex Vatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute.
I'm talking about pharmaceutical companies. I'm talking about bridges. I'm talking about types of things that clearly are civilian infrastructure.
Yesterday, a medical research facility was also struck. CENTCOM and the Israeli military haven't responded to my questions about that. But the Pasteur Institute is one of the oldest research and public health centers in the region, established in the 1920s in an agreement between Tehran and Paris.
There's a place you would show up to get your vaccines. One of the places in Tehran, the capital. And the fact that it's been bombed, understandably, has upset a lot of Iranians.
Universities, schools, hospitals, and a dairy factory have been hit in this war. Under international law, targeting civilian infrastructure can be a war crime.
I don't think anybody's going to dispute the fact that based on international law, what is happening is illegal. But that's not where we are in terms of the conversation in the United States. President Trump is talking about putting Iran back at the Stone Age sort of era.
Trump made that statement in his primetime address this week, threatening to go even harder on civilian targets if Iran doesn't capitulate. These statements are alarming to many Iranians. Some supported the US and Israeli campaign at the beginning in the hope that it will bring regime change. That hasn't happened so far. Also damaged in this war are historical and cultural sites. They range from ancient structures to more recent ones. Turaj Daryayi is an Iranian historian. He directs the Center for Persian Studies at the University of California, Irvine. He says one site that has been damaged is a 5th century fort in Lorestan province in western Iran, one of about 300 still standing.
This one perhaps is the best kept up. It houses some museums in some ways.
Daryayi says the strike hit the perimeter of the fort, causing damage to the structure. Iranian scholars have documented damage to at least 70 historical and cultural sites since the beginning of the war. They include palaces with ornate mirrors and woodwork. Structures at the famous Naqsh Jahan Square in Esfahan in central Iran have also been damaged, according to reports. It's a UNESCO heritage site from the 17th century.
For the Iranians in general, I would say, these are sites of memory. And so when these get damaged or destroyed, you begin to forget and you lose your cultural memory and historical memory as a nation.
Nader Tehrani teaches architecture at Cooper Union in New York. From a busy airport, he tells me about some of the damage at the Golestan Palace, which belongs to the Qajar dynasty from the 18th and 19th centuries.
Apparently the destruction there is quite extensive, with a lot of the tile work and amazing glass work that is a central part of the characteristic features of its interior are destroyed.
It has been difficult to capture the full extent of the damage to these sites because of the internet shutdown imposed by the Iranian government. Tehrani says because Iran has a lot of historical sites, it also has a robust system for their repairs. But he adds that there will likely be challenges besides the cost and expertise.
I wouldn't go as far as to saying that these can't be mended or reconstructed to some degree. But the problem is that these are not structures that were built out of reinforced modern construction to begin with.
They will be impacted by the wave of the blasts, he says. Historian Turaj Daryayi has spent his career researching and writing about these sites in Iran. He says watching them being damaged by Israeli and American bombs is personal.
Well, as someone who has gone to many of these sites, thinking about it is hurtful. It's physically and emotionally hurtful to know that our history is being obliterated.
He says the importance of these sites go beyond Iran and Iranians. They are a part of our collective humanity, he says. For the world, I'm Shirin Jafari.
To say that transatlantic relations are on ice is an understatement. President Trump's aggressive rhetoric on Greenland earlier this year was widely understood as a threat to Denmark, a NATO member. Then the U.S. went to war in the Middle East without building a coalition of European support. This week, the U.K. convened diplomats from more than 40 countries to discuss the chokehold the war has put on the global oil market. The U.S. did not attend that meeting. French President Emmanuel Macron, speaking in South Korea, said that alliances are built on trust.
Je pense qu'on a tous besoin de stabilité, de calme, de retour.
We need stability and peace, Macron told CNN. This is not a show. The current situation raises a question for European leaders of how they defend their own security should the need arise. They're taking a cue from Finland. Helja Osa is a Finnish research associate at the London School of Economics.
So the concept of preparedness and resilience in Finland, it's very deeply rooted in this idea of comprehensive security. It's a model and a kind of conceptual approach to security, but also it's a very practical governance and cooperation model that emphasizes preparedness, planning, information sharing across all the governmental and societal levels. And it's also a very effective way of implementing all these security planning and security models. It's a system where all the vital functions of our society are taken care of in a collaborative way.
And what exactly are Finns preparing for?
Of course, problem number one is always Russia. And that's just the kind of geopolitical fact. As you probably know, we have 830 miles of border with Russia. And that, of course, defines the Finnish geopolitical position in Northern Europe. And because we were not military aligned for a long time, so that has made the Finnish preparedness system very different from the rest of the Europe. During the Cold War, Finland did many things differently and went against the general direction of travel. We maintained conscription system for men, maintained strong defense forces and conventional capabilities, but also because of the geopolitical location, we developed comprehensive security model and maintained these resilience and preparedness structures. For example, the fact that we have a strong network of civil defense shelters, which is quite unique and different from the rest of the European countries these days.
Yeah, so talk more about the civilian defense shelters, for example. I'm really interested in how all this works in civilian life. When did those start and how are they maintained today?
To various levels. So some of them are in very good condition and they're used on daily basis, for example, for sports venues or other kind of places that can be used every day, swimming halls and for this kind of purposes. But some of them are not in that good shape and they're not maintained that regularly. And I think only in the capital there are more shelters than there are inhabitants in the city. And I think in total in Finland, if I'm not completely wrong, there are about 4.5 million spaces in a country of 5.5 million.
Wow, that's incredible.
It practically means that in the cities, everyone who needs a shelter, there is a space for them.
And just to be clear, we're talking shelters, so kind of like civil defense shelters, but I would guess that if there is an actual attack, they would also be used as bunkers, correct?
Yes, exactly.
I gather there are actually civilian institutions that lead this. Are they volunteer? Do they undergo regular drills or training? And who organizes those?
Well, just one example is the National Defense Training Association. It's mostly for reservists, so people who have done their military service, but it's also open for people who haven't done it. For example, last autumn, I did a weekend course that was targeted for women just to learn the kind of basic skills, what military service looks like. But there are also other courses that don't really have this kind of military component. For example, just learning how to give first aid or how to prepare for hybrid attacks, how to prepare for cyber attacks. So there are plenty of different kinds of courses.
Are they learning to shoot?
For example, on the course that I took, we did learn how to shoot, but in other courses, that's possible as well.
I said earlier that Finland is now being seen by some as a resource on preparedness. Do you have any examples of other countries adopting similar measures prompted by what Finland has done?
Well, of course, our closest friends and allies, so Sweden is doing great work on that front as well, Estonia and other Baltic countries as well. So Finland is definitely not the only one who is doing these things. There are other countries who are really, it's interesting how many countries, especially in Western Europe, are very interested in kind of copying the Finnish model. But as I always say, it's not really an export product as it is. So you can, of course, take bits and pieces here and there, but you cannot really just copy and paste the model. Like I said, we are a country of 5.5 million people, and let's say Germany has over 80 million people. You cannot just copy the system like as it is.
Yes, so the presence of Russia right next door is very sharp for a lot of Finns. And I gather that for memories of the Winter War of 1939 and 1940, those memories have been passed down, I imagine. Does that account for some of the seriousness of purpose around civilian preparedness for war?
Yes, I'm sure it has a big part to play. Of course, it's been over 80 years, so it's second-hand and third-hand knowledge these days, but it is something that people do remember. And for example, now that Ukraine has bombed these Russian oil ports on the Baltic Sea, some of those areas used to be Finland before the Winter War. So of course, it is something that makes war in Ukraine and current war very close to the Finnish people.
That was Helja Osal at the London School of Economics. More news to come. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In West Africa, the president of Burkina Faso is consolidating power and planning dramatic changes to the government. In an interview yesterday on national television, Ibrahim Traoré walked back plans for elections that would have happened in 2029. Instead, he said, quote, "People need to forget about the issue of democracy. Democracy is not for us." Traoré took power in a coup about 3 years ago, and yesterday the government passed a new charter making his leadership indefinite. When pressed by a journalist what his comments meant for human rights, Traoré responded.
Qui parle des droits de l'homme? Qui a bombardé les enfants en Libye tués? Qui bombarde les enfants un peu partout?
Who's talking about human rights, he asked. Look who bombed Libya and killed children there, referring to the NATO attack in 2011. Who is bombing far and wide and killing children without distinction? Is that human rights, he asked? That's not what we do. Leonardo Villalon runs a Sahel research group at the University of Florida. He said Traoré has been taking steps toward this for years.
Well, I think what's really interesting about Traoré is that he's managed to, at the same time, be quite repressive at home. He's really managed to clamp down and hold on to power while building a sort of a cult following, both at home and abroad especially, that I think has given him a lot of leeway to be able to sort of break with past practice.
Tell us more about that repression you're referring to in Burkina Faso that he's been kind of in charge of.
Yeah, since coming to office, he's gradually shut down the political process, suppressed civil society, banned political parties, and then people have been arrested and disappearing. He had a practice for a while of conscripting people who had no particular military training and were well past military age and sending it to the front as a sort of a means of intimidating people. And so he's managed very much to sort of shut down a political space that I think it's important to emphasize. It was very open, despite a lot of military involvement in Burkinabe history. Burkina had a very vibrant civil society and a very vibrant press. And Traoré has managed in both the domestic, I think, and then the international climate to get away with shutting that down.
So as you said, I mean, he took power in a coup, postponed elections, banned political parties. Were these statements throwing shade on democracy all that surprising?
No, I don't think they're very surprising. I think it's very clear. The talk of democracy used to be sort of necessary to sort of military regimes to justify themselves for as long as they could hold on. But I think in the current context, he feels he can abandon that pretense. He's got the sort of the strength at home, but also he's got some cover internationally, I have to say. Among others, the United States government recently has signaled that promoting democracy is no longer a priority in the region. The U.S. government is starting to re-engage with the countries in the Sahel that we had previously backed away from precisely for violations of human rights and democracy. And so I think he's got cover to make those kinds of statements and to get away with them.
So just yesterday, the nonprofit Human Rights Watch released a report stating that in Burkina Faso, tens of thousands of people have been displaced in recent years, with nearly 2,000 people killed at the hands of both insurgents and the Burkina Faso military and allied militias. So what exactly is going on?
That report, I think, was quite an interesting report. It referred to both Burkina Faso and to Mali, and it referred to the fact that these have become, those two countries in particular, along with Niger, have become sort of the epicenter of global terrorism. And what this report pointed out is that the violence that is being perpetrated there is more, not only as much as, but even more on the side of military and associated groups. And so we're seeing, somewhere between a very strong insurgency that is being suppressed violently and in extraordinary numbers of millions of displaced people right now. Large parts of the country are no longer under the government's control. And prioritizing the fight against is, I think, sort of what has given Traoré some. So he sort of feels that he can prioritize that and he can get away with a lot of things by saying that this is what he's working on. That's his priority. That's what he's doing.
Now, Leonardo, despite all this chaos, President Traoré is actually very popular outside of Burkina Faso. Why is that?
Yeah, I think it's a confluence of factors why Traoré is very popular. He's managed to cast himself as the heir to a very popular, charismatic younger leader of Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, who died young and was therefore seen as a young revolutionary hero who had tried to break with the chains of colonialism, etc. Traoré has managed to portray himself as the heir to that. And it's, I think, in a context where there is an awful lot of frustration among young people, in particular, in West Africa and across West Africa, with the failed promises of democracy and development. In the early 1990s, lots of the countries in the region all embraced democratic systems, and there's a lot of hope and aspiration. But now there's a whole generation that's grown up since then, who was born and grown up since then, and doesn't feel that that's worked for them. So I think he's managed to tap this sort of reserve of particularly youthful dissatisfaction. He's been very successful at sort of the anti-Western and specifically anti-French rhetoric, and he's been very successful also at tapping into some of that.
Yeah, I mean, if we return to his remarks on democracy on national TV in Burkina Faso, it sounded like a political debate over political systems. But you seemed to suggest earlier that this anti-democratic rhetoric is simply about justifying a single-party state, and to be blunt, Traoré giving himself cover to stay in power as long as he wants. Is that right?
Well, I mean, we have to guess at the intentions, but it's not hard to guess that the intention may be to prolong his stay in power. But he does have something to stand on in sense of there is a popular dissatisfaction with democracy in West Africa particularly, but in large parts of the world. There's always been this rhetoric of, no, we're on the way to democracy. Sometimes we fall off track, but we get back on track. This is the first time since the early 90s where in this region somebody just says, no, never mind, we're not trying to get democracy at all. Domestically, it has its opponents, of course. They're mostly silenced at the moment in Burkina Faso, but he has his supporters as well, too.
Of course, neighboring Mali and Niger, we've mentioned them. They've also seen coups that brought anti-Western military leaders to power, and these three countries are in clear opposition to the old guard countries still represented economically and tied to the West in this economic bloc known as ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. So, Leonardo, what does this moment tell you about the future of not just Burkina Faso, but the wider West Africa region?
Yeah, the region is clearly at a crossroads, and at a pretty significant crossroads. The three countries you just mentioned have actually formally left ECOWAS, and they're very, very clearly breaking with the model and attempting to suggest an alternative. West Africa is extremely divided as a result at the moment. Some governments, like in Senegal, have attempted to remain within ECOWAS and balance sort of support for it while adopting a little bit of the rhetoric of anti-colonialism and sovereignty that I think appeals to youth. Of course, the big regional hegemons, Nigeria in particular, but Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and others remain within ECOWAS, and there's a sort of a fork in the roads right now, I think we're seeing in West Africa.
Leonardo Villalon is a professor of African politics and coordinator of the Sahel Research Group at the University of Florida. Coming up, it's a busy week for Catholic churches everywhere, with Good Friday today and Easter this Sunday. But people are not signing up for the priesthood in the numbers they used to. One bishop in Belgium is proposing a pretty radical fix. Plus, some Iranians are pinning their hope for a democratic future on one political figure living outside the country, but he is controversial. All that's still ahead. You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Easter Sunday is coming up. It has been a busy week for the Catholic Church, but across Europe, the number of priests available to lead Easter services has been falling. The Bishop of Antwerp in Belgium has proposed a solution, allowed married men to become priests. The World's Europe correspondent, Orla Barry, has more.
Johann Bonny, the Bishop of Antwerp, is no stranger to controversy. More than a decade ago, the 70-year-old cleric called for same-sex unions to be given a church blessing. Still, his proposal in March came as a shock to some.
It's extremely unusual. I can't think of another example of a bishop saying, I'm going to go ahead with a plan to ordain married men to the priesthood.
David Quinn is a columnist with the Irish Catholic newspaper. Bishop Bonny didn't just call for married men to be ordained. He said by 2028, he planned to ordain them himself.
I mean, the nearest thing I can think of is Archbishop Lefebvre, who was a breakaway from the church over the Latin Mass and Vatican II reforms. He ordained some bishops a number of decades ago, and because he did so without permission, he actually ended up being excommunicated from the church.
This week, Bonny told a Belgian news outlet that his appeal was a cry for help.
Il y avait peut-être encore dans les années 50 et 60.
In the 50s and 60s, there were around 1,500 priests in this diocese, he said. Today, we've just a few hundred active priests under the age of 75, and half of them are foreign priests, he said. Bishop Bunny probably wouldn't face excommunication, but if he goes ahead with his plan, Quinn says, the Pope could order his suspension or even his dismissal.
Because if he didn't take an action like that, what's effectively happening is other bishops might well follow Bishop Bunny's example.
Pope Leo hasn't made any definitive statement about celibacy, although in Rome last year he did preach about the importance of it to a room full of bishops.
Insieme alla povertà effettiva, il vescovo vive anche
along with
quella forma
material
di povertà
poverty, the life of a bishop is also marked by another form of poverty, he said, and that is celibacy. Bishops must remain celibate, he said, and present to all the authentic image of the Church, holy and chaste. The tradition of celibacy within the Roman Catholic Church goes back hundreds of years.
The fundamental one-line argument is that the priest is married to his church.
Massimo Fagioli is an Italian historian and theology professor at Trinity College Dublin.
His real wife is the church, and there's no way to be completely dedicated to your wife, the church, and being also a devoted husband, devoted father, and so on.
There may be less spiritual reasons too for the celibacy rule, Fagioli says. It could also put a burden on church finances. There are some married priests in the Catholic Church. The Eastern Rite Catholic churches, for example, are a branch of the church that allow priests to marry. And when an Anglican priest converts to Catholicism, he can be ordained as a priest even if he's married. But those numbers are very small, Fagioli says. For most men wanting to join the priesthood, celibacy comes with the package.
I always knew that celibacy would be a challenge, but I wanted to be a priest first and foremost.
Alex Walker was ordained at the age of 26 in a parish in England in 1980. He had wanted to become a priest from the age of 13, he says. Then 6 years into his ministry, he met Jan. It started as a platonic friendship, he says, but after a while, their feelings for each other grew stronger, and eventually the struggle between his commitment to his vocation and his love for Jan nearly destroyed him.
I think that's why I became so ill, because I think towards the end I was living a double life, which was completely incompatible with my calling. And I know that some priests continue to live this dual life, but for me, that wasn't the way forward. It was all or nothing.
Walker decided to step down from the priesthood. Today he has 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. But if the celibacy rule wasn't in place, he says, he could still be there, serving his parish too. He believes Bishop Bonny's proposal could attract many more men to the priesthood. Irish Catholic columnist David Quinn isn't so sure.
Broadly speaking, the vocations crisis is caused obviously by secularisation. I mean, there's far fewer practicing Christians overall than there used to be. But a second factor that people tend to overlook is families are far smaller than they used to be. And if there's only now 1 or 2 and you've 1 son, there's a fair chance, even if you're a devout Catholic family, that you don't want him becoming priest.
Besides, Quinn says, lots of people like the fact the Catholic Church sticks to its traditions and doesn't bend with the wind. Former priest Alex Walker says there might be another reason the Vatican appears to be so stuck in its ways.
The celibate priesthood keeps the lid on issues like homosexuality in the church. What happens if we allow married priests? Then we're looking at whether or not those gay priests who have partners, can they then marry their partners? You then have women priests. Can those women priests then consider marrying their partners?
Celibacy helps keep all those issues under wraps, he says. As for Bishop Bonny's proposal, so far the Vatican has maintained a vow of silence. For The World, I'm Orla Barry.
Through the violence in Iran, one person's name has surfaced as a leading and controversial opposition figure, Reza Pahlavi. His father, the former Shah, was ousted in 1979 and was replaced by the current Islamic government. So Pahlavi is a prince in exile. Reporter Fariba Nawa, based in Istanbul, joined me to explain who Reza Pahlavi is and what he represents to Iranians.
He's an American citizen. He was trained as a fighter pilot in the American Air Force, and he studied political science at USC in California. So he's not that much in touch with what's happening in Iran. And he wasn't taken seriously as a political figure until recently among the opposition in Iran. He's been raised up by external forces, particularly Israel, Saudi, and the United States. There have been many attempts to turn him into the opposition leader. That's one side of the story. The other side is Reza Pahlavi is a name, and the Pahlavi dynasty is a name that most Iranians, even inside Iran, young people know from Iran's history. His father was the monarch. There are people who believe that he has an organic following because of his father.
So something of a divisive figure. So what are you hearing from Iranians, first of all, who like him? Why do they see him as a future leader of the country?
So a lot of the Iranians I talk to inside Iran and those who come and go to Turkey say, we don't necessarily want him as a king. We want him as a transitional leader. Then that will pave the way and the path to democracy, where there will be a referendum, and that referendum will decide what kind of government Iranians want. And then they will decide who will be the leader through democratic means. That's one side. Then you have people who are like, no, we want the monarch back. It was the best thing that happened to us, and we want a king.
When people say there would be a referendum to let people decide on their government in Iran, what sort of apparatus exists to implement that? Is there a basis for even imagining that might be possible?
It's hard to say because right now the regime has held on really strong. The leadership inside Iran is almost all of them are in jail. Whether there is that apparatus or not would be decided by them. The institutions of Iran have changed since the revolution started. It's based on a theocracy. And if you're going to go back to a democracy, there needs to be a huge shift in how that system works.
And for Iranians who don't want Reza Pahlavi leading the country, why not?
Well, many of these are leftists and those in the pro-democracy movement. They say that his father was a despot. He was a puppet of the Americans and other external actors. And bringing back his son is like replacing the Taliban with the Taliban, which is what happened in Afghanistan after the American occupation there.
So they do not think Reza Pahlavi would be taking the country into democracy, more of a return to imperial rule with the support of the U.S., perhaps.
Exactly.
So Iran has had several large protests for regime change, from the Green Revolution to the Women Life Freedom Movement, and of course a recent very bloody protest that happened earlier this year. Pahlavi, as a future leader, got traction with the latest protest. What actually has his role been?
Yeah, so on the border of Turkey and Iran, I met a young man who had protested because the prince called on Iranians to come to the streets, and he promised that there would be help. That help didn't come, as we all know now, and there was a massacre of Iranians, and he was witness to that. One of the first questions he asked me was, can I talk to the prince? Do you have access to the prince? I'm really angry with him. We all came out thinking he was going to become our leader.
You're a Western reporter. That man thought you'd be able to contact Pahlavi. We have seen pro-war demonstrations here with Iranians carrying U.S. and Israeli flags. What are you hearing about the role the U.S. and Israel may have played in elevating Reza Pahlavi's profile?
Well, there is research that Israel has played a big part, as well as Saudi, in propping up Reza Pahlavi. There have been bots, there have been campaigns on social media, and it's been an ugly fight. The Pahlavi and monarchists are really mean to other people who don't agree with them. They've been posting addresses of people who disagree with them. They get doxxed very quickly.
You know, it may be obvious why, after 47 years of authoritarian rule in Iran, there are not more recognizable names of possible future leaders in a democratic Iran. But is it that simple? I mean, in a place where democracy is not allowed to flourish, the imagination of who could lead seems to conjure this one person, the offspring of the man who preceded this current regime.
Some analysts say that Pahlavi is a mirror of the Islamic Republic, just in a different form, a monarchy versus a theocracy. And Iranians who have fought for democracy for so many years are still not getting that opportunity.
That was reporter Fariba Nawa in Istanbul. The Central Asian city of Adam in Azerbaijan was destroyed in the early 1990s by fierce fighting between Azerbaijan and Armenia. That's when ethnic Armenian forces had taken control of the Nagorno-Karabakh region after it declared independence from Azerbaijan. But in 2023, Azerbaijani forces took back the enclave, forcing most of the more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians to flee. Dorian Jones reports from Adam on efforts to rebuild.
The detonation of the latest haul of mines cleared from the city of Ardam. The dangerous work done in freezing weather is led by Elnor Gazamov. He has lost most of his fingers from one of his hands, showing just how risky mine clearance is. Gazamov says that because Ardam was on the front line of the long conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, making the area safe again is a huge challenge.
This area is located in the former line of contact. We have cleared 300,000 square meters and found more than 10,000 landmines.
How dangerous has it been to clear these mines?
Yeah, we have more than 10 deminers injured, lost their legs, and we lost 2 deminers during the explosive ordnance disposal, because not just landmines, and ammunition also very sensitive. When time passes, they start become very sensitive. It's not a military activity, it's a humanitarian. That's why we have to make sure that when we release the territory to the civilians, they will not hurt. Yeah.
And how long do you think it will take to clear all of this?
We are 5 years in Agdam, just 30% is finished.
Since the war, access to Ardam remains strictly controlled. And I visited with a small group of journalists in a trip organized by Azerbaijani authorities. The city of Ardam was once home to 40,000 people. It was once a cultural center of the region and home to Azerbaijan's most famous football club, Karabakh, which has long since decamped to the capital, Baku. Today, not a single house remains standing. All have been razed to the ground. And even the trees didn't escape the conflict, now a barren wasteland. The historical Juma Mosque was one of the few buildings that survived, being used for animals by ethnic Armenians who ousted the Azerbaijani population in 1993 in a bloody war. Imam Mehman Nezarov, who is 45 years old, proudly shows the fully restored mosque. He says up to 100 people now come for Friday prayers, as the city slowly comes back to life. Nezarov remembers that he was a child when he had to leave the city.
We were forced to leave because of the sound of fighting, which was getting closer and closer. Everyone was terrified and panicked. My mother took me, my sister, and my brother. We left with just the clothes on our backs. We had some support from aid organizations, and we found shelter in a nearby city in a wagon at a railway station, where we spent 3 years. I will never forget those years. We always prayed to God that one day we could return and pray at this mosque. We can't put into words how we feel that dream we had as a child, a teenager, and an adult is finally realized.
Richard Giragosian, director of the Regional Studies Center, a think tank based in the Armenian capital, Yerevan, explains the heavy cost paid by ethnic Armenians.
What we saw within 24 hours was the forced expulsion of the remaining 110,000 Armenians from their homes in Nagorno-Karabakh. And the human tragedy there was leaving behind homes, personal possessions, family graves, and coming to Armenia, which was more of a foreign country than many people understand. Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh had very tenuous direct connections to Armenia proper. And unfortunately, this was the cost of the diplomatic breakthrough that we now see.
The diplomatic breakthrough Girogosyan mentioned is a step toward better relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. When Nagorno-Karabakh broke away in 1993, Baku cut off diplomatic ties and closed its border. But after the recent war, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan have promised to improve relations. This year, Baku opened its border to allow oil and grain from Kazakhstan to reach Armenia, which is important for Yerevan as it tries to break away from Russia's influence and move closer to Europe. Aykan Jabarov, who manages Ardam's newest hotel, is hopeful about better relations. His family came from Ardam and fought in the last Nagorno-Karabakh war.
We lived together before, and now, as you know, every leaders talks about peace. We have to make good relationships again.
With Ardam still in ruins and 1,000 or so returnees living in newly built homes, it will be some time before the city returns to life. Dorian Jones, Ardam.
Dorian reported that story for DW's Inside Europe. The World comes to you every weekday from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Marco Werman. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.